there?
No, that's in a drawer someplace
It's
at home.
okay.
Hello, it's John Florescu here from Bucharest, and welcome to Conversation on Alianta's series. And today we have Ambassador Adrian Zuckerman, who most people know don't need much of an introduction. Anyways, allow me just to make a few points. Adrian Zuckerman was ambassador here in 2019 to 2022. He is the first Romanian-born ambassador in Romania. He came when he was in the, I think, third grade to New Haven, Connecticut. And in New Haven, there, his father worked at nearby Yale University at the medical school. And he had distinguished himself particularly with a physics award and a map award that helped get him into MIT. And he graduated, was in Boston for 3-4 years, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And then he was involved in the real estate business. He's appointed by President Trump as ambassador to Romania, and he served here with distinction. It's worth pointing out that also he negotiated the largest ever Romanian-American deal, which was a fantastic boost for the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, in fact, where I'm speaking tomorrow. And it was the largest deal that was ever done by Exim Bank overseas. So that was a significant contribution. Anyways, now he is an advisor to DL Piper. I know there's a specific word for that, I guess.
Of counsel.
Of counsel to DL Piper, the law firm, one of the biggest law firms and most respected here in Bucharest. And I welcome you back, and it's good to see you.
It's great to see you, but DLA Piper, just to correct you slightly, I think we're the second or third largest law firm in the world, and we have it's a small, cozy firm with, I think, about 5,000 lawyers or so. I'm not quite sure of the head count as we speak, and we have a global footprint in 40 plus countries all over the world, including Europe, obviously the U.S. I'm based in New York and Washington, and we try to do what's right.
Terrific. Well, this is a very important time because I think as we speak, President Putin and President Trump should be speaking, it seems to me, just about now. And it's rather useful speaking to you right now, Mr. Ambassador, because you know President Trump. He appointed you. How would you describe him as a person?
I have only superlatives for the president. I think he had a terrific first term. I think at the end of the first Trump administration, the world was at peace. I think there was economic prosperity, not only in the United States, but throughout the world, notwithstanding the ravages of COVID. And America was a leader in the world. Sadly, things changed over the last 4 years. And as we've seen, he is now forced to unscramble the omelet, so to speak. And it's very challenging, not only with a variety of domestic issues, but with a variety of very significant global issues that are quite challenging. There are wars raging in not just in Ukraine, which we hear most about, but the Middle East. There's 10 or 12 wars in West Africa and countries in West Africa. There's socialist upheaval in South America and Latin America. And we've got, and obviously, before I forget, we have China creating all kinds of havoc in Asia with threats against Taiwan, the Philippines, and trying to take over a variety of islands in the South China Sea. So in a short 4 years, we've gone from a world at peace to a world which I see on the brink of potential conflict on a global scale.
Okay, and we're going to get to that in a second, but I'm going to bring it to domestic politics, Romanian politics right now, and it ties the two worlds together to some extent. But one question that's been swirling in a lot of people's mind, what's the strongest evidence have you seen of the Russian involvement in the Romanian elections?
That's an excellent question, and I know a lot of people have asked about that. And let me start at the end first, and we'll go through it. I think it's unequivocal. It's an unequivocal conclusion that the Romanian elections were manipulated by massive, massive Russian interference through TikTok, other social networks like Telegram, as well as a variety of dark money, black money, fraudulent transfers, and the use of agents, sleeper agents, and paramilitary forces similar to what people refer to as the Wagner troops. A number of those characters were arrested in Romania. Some fled, a lot were arrested. My guess is there are more that remain to be arrested that may not have been identified yet, that were paid for through Russian means, Russian entities and intermediaries.
How is it?
What's ironic, just
Yeah.
I don't know if people know what's ironic, is a number of those characters were captured fighting in the Congo several months ago, and they appealed to the Romanian government to intercede and bring them back home. So, which happened. So it's ironic that they undertook this latest escapade against the country that saved them.
That's interesting. Well, I saw that about the Africans taking into consideration what you just said about, the evidence against them. How do you explain that J.D. Vance and Elon Musk seem to be somewhat sympathetic to the situation of Călin Ceausescu?
Well, I really don't have a good explanation for that, but we can try. But let me go back to some of the evidence. I think with this, nobody really heard of this Ceausescu character. Some people had heard of him, but in the electoral process here, I believe there were about 15 candidates. I don't think Ceausescu ever got any higher than number 11 or 10 in the polls.
No.
There were no TV interviews. Just like we have in the U.S. elections, there's always a handful of names nobody's ever heard of. Ceausescu was a similar sort of guy. And in the last 2 weeks before the elections, apparently this massive cyber campaign started on TikTok, Telegram, other social networks with tens of millions of hits in a country of 15 billion people. It's just an amazing sort of undertaking, which was put in place by the Russian FSB years ago, shortly after the invasion of Crimea. And the operation was detailed in a variety of reports. The Russians set up bot companies in Turkey. There were 4 companies or so that have been identified in Turkey that promulgated this attack. There was one entity in London that participated in this as well. I'm sure as the investigations continue, others will be identified as well. In the interval shortly after the election, all or virtually all European countries, as well as some non-European countries, identified the attack, all confirmed the Russian massive attack, including the U.S. intelligence services, France, Italy, all the major countries confirmed that there was no disagreement, and there's absolutely no doubt with regard to the Russian involvement here. Moreover, towards the end of last year, I believe it was in November, December, the United States government, as well as our European allies, all issued letters of support for the Romanian Constitutional Court overturning the results of the first round of the elections. So there's really
So
no.
a fairly good case, if you'd say, a shut and closed case.
From everything I've been told and what I've seen, obviously, uh, uh, I'm not in office anymore,
Yeah.
so I have not seen any secret documents, classified documents, but there is no doubt in my mind, nor should there be any doubt in any reasonable person's mind with regard to what happened. For people that are, but
Sorry.
I just want to add one quick thing. For people that are really not familiar with this, this is not an uncommon occurrence in Europe. In my opinion, the Russians have declared war on Europe last year in 24. There have been over 30 similar cyber attacks and disinformation attacks against a variety of European countries, including the UK, Germany, France, many others, but none on the scale of what happened in Romania. The Serbian elections were attacked and manipulated by the Russians, and Vucic, who's a Russian, a Putin stooge in essence, won the elections. They tried to do a similar thing in Germany recently. They did the same thing in Georgia. They did the same thing in Slovakia. They did the same thing in Croatia. So the Russians have been interfering in virtually every facet of European life. They've also launched a number of hybrid attacks, some kinetic, some hybrid in the sense of cyber accompanied by other things. Some, if you remember the Olympics in France, the trains experienced a major stoppage, which has been attributed to Russian services interference with their services. There were anti-Semitic statements trying to create chaos in Paris, which they actually caught some Moldovan perpetrators, which were funded by the Russians. There were explosions and other kinetic impacts in a variety of locations throughout Europe, from London to the Baltics to other locations. So I really think we're in a very unique situation where the Russians have unleashed this hybrid war against Western democracies, principally Europe.
And so you don't share the view that essentially that Romania's image was damaged because they had a recount, then they had him, they canceled the election, and then they disqualified him. And there was some criticism of that coming out of Washington as well, and somehow that Romania was an undemocratic nation, didn't deserve to be among European democratic nations. What do you make of that accusation?
Well, I'm not sure anybody in Washington said what you just said, but I think the Russian propaganda machine is in full swing, and what some people picked up on is the fact that the so-called people's candidate was knocked out, free speech was knocked out. Well, that's really not the case. What happened was a massive attack on the Romanian electoral process through fraud and cyber attacks and disinformation. And that's what the Constitutional Court uh, um, dealt with, which I think is exactly the opposite of the way some people backed by Russian propaganda present it, because that's the way a democracy should work. If you see a problem, one person or another should not make decisions. People should have their legal recourse, appeal to the courts. And the court, the Constitutional Court in Romania, is from a broad base. It's not appointed by the president or one person. It's appointed by the various parties and the parliament. So it's a reflection, a cross section. It's intended to be fair and equitable, and that's what the recourse is. And if we recall 4 years ago, when President Trump thought there were issues with the electoral process, he did the same thing. He sought recourse to the courts, except the courts dealt with it differently in his case, but he sought recourse in a number of states with regard to what he perceived to be election improprieties, which is exactly what happened here.
Yeah. Well, that's good. A complete explanation. Now, I want to switch to what's going on right now, or maybe going on in the next few hours, is a conversation between President Trump and President Putin. I noted the other day that there was a poll in the United States that said 62% of Americans support the Ukrainian side of the argument, 62%. We can argue how much. But most people often feel, or seem to feel, that the die is cast against Ukraine right now and against Zelensky. Do you share that view?
That view would require me to put myself in somebody else's mind.
Your mind.
Let's back up and try to look at the facts a little bit.
Okay.
Prior to 2013, 2012, maybe even go back to 1994. In 1994, Ukraine surrendered its nuclear weapons to the Russians. They got some money from the United States, and there was a piece of paper signed between Russia, the UK, and the United States, obviously Ukraine as well, guaranteeing the border integrity of Ukraine. Shortly before the invasion of Crimea, the Russians invaded the Donbas region on similar pretexts as Hitler did when he started his campaign against Europe, with the little green men saying they're trying to protect Russian citizens and interests in the Donbas area. And then pretty soon a full-blown war started out. And then in 2014, the Russians invaded Crimea based on the same thing. Now, Crimea is a very strategic piece of land for the Russians because it opens up access to the Black Sea for them. And in fact, until recently, until the last 2 or 3 years, the Russian fleet was based there. And instead of the former Black Sea Russian fleet, which was a bunch of rusted out hulks, they replaced the fleet and had fairly modern, state-of-the-art naval warships there. Some were sunk by the Ukrainians, and the others were forced to go into the Caspian, I believe, or into the Mediterranean, because under the Montreux Convention, the Turks blocked access to the Russian naval ships coming back into the Black Sea. So the invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago, or slightly more than 3 years ago, was an unprovoked act of aggression by an expansionist Putin, who is wreaking havoc around the world. In my opinion, Zelensky, and we can discuss some of the mistakes he may have made and politically recently, some of which we've heard publicly. But I compare Zelensky to Winston Churchill saving uh, um, uh, the UK and frankly Europe in the Second World War. He was offered a helicopter ride out of Kiev when the war started, and he said, "No, send me some weapons so I can defend my country." Were it not for his steadfastness, uh, the Ukrainians would be back as part of Russia. Mm. So, coming back to your question, I think that the Russians are incredibly dangerous. I think Putin is a criminal. I think he has caused the needless slaughter of men, women, children, civilians. I am told that there have been hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children kidnapped from their families, resettled under different names throughout parts of Russia, and probably they will never be reunited with their families. There's stories circulating about Ukrainian prisoners of war being decapitated. Horrendous stories coming out. So to me, there's only one person responsible for this. It's Vladimir Putin. It was a completely unprovoked and unnecessary invasion of a neighbor. Putin has made threats against Moldova, against Romania, against the Baltic states, and frankly, against other states like France, but those are taken less seriously than the threats against the Baltics and Moldova and Romania.
You mentioned Romania there, and you're born in Romania. Are you a little concerned about Romania because of the fact that there's a history of somewhat antagonistic history between the two countries, that you have the old Hungarian situation of 1919, a hangover from the First World War, that you have Serbia, whose soul seems to beat more Russian than anything, and Bulgaria? Do you think Romania, in a way, is a bit isolated in this situation?
I think you're right, but just since you mentioned Serbia, yes, the Serbians tended to be more Russophilic, but again, for people who may not have heard the news, who are not here locally, there was a march of roughly, I believe, over 1 million people, maybe as many as 1.5 million people that traveled to the capital of Serbia this past weekend to protest Vucic, who is a Putin flunky, the corruption and the conditions there, the stolen election. They were attacked viciously with these ultrasound waves that apparently cause great panic. It's just a terrible situation. I'm less concerned about the Hungarian situation as I am about the Russian threat. After the Second World War, as many people know, at Yalta, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin came to an agreement, and the sphere of influence for most of the Eastern European countries and the Balkans fell to the Russians. That led off a 50-year or so period of communism, from which most of these Eastern European countries have still not fully recovered. It was created a disaster and a nightmare. Many brave Romanians, Poles, Czechs, and others fought against communism and fought for democracy and liberty. And in my opinion, they're not prepared to go back to the rule of a criminal like Vladimir Putin, who bred KGB agent who used to rule East Germany before Germany was reunified before 1989. And he ruled East Germany with a iron fist. It was one of the most oppressive communist regimes. And in large part, that was due to Vladimir Putin. So there is nothing good that can be said about Vladimir Putin in my mind.
Taking on board what you just said, and I happen to agree with it, why do you think the Trump administration, Trump himself, has taken a kind of sympathetic tone, understanding tone? Is this a strategy, or how do you explain that?
Well, let's look back in the first Trump administration. Trump was criticized for saying some seemingly nice things about Jong Kim, the despot in North Korea.
Yeah.
And actually meeting with him, and many people criticized President Trump for doing that. However, during the last Trump administration, we didn't hear anything from Kim. No missile launches, no advancement on development of nuclear sites. President Trump was able to achieve great results to sort of keep Kim in his place. Mm-hmm. Today, I think he's trying to do the same thing. I certainly don't believe that President Trump sympathizes with Putin. I think everybody knows he's the criminal that he is. But he wants to be able to sit down with him and have some sort of rational discussion to get him back in the box that exploded 4 years ago in the Biden administration. It's not easy to do. It's not easy to unscramble the eggs in the omelet. And that's what we're faced with. And one of the biggest problems that occurred, and in my opinion, caused by the Biden administration, Blinken and Sullivan, principally responsible for this, was a unification of the axis of evil, which is Iran, China, and Russia. You've got North Korean soldiers fighting alongside the Russians in Ukraine. You've got a variety of defense deals between Russia and Iran. And you've got a variety of defense deals between Russia and China, which is a terrible, terrible danger for the world's democracies. Yeah. How do you undo that? Very delicate and complicated question.
So essentially, you're saying, Mr. Ambassador, that the nicey niceness a little bit is part of the strategy to warm up the other side, to get a negotiation. But you have no doubt that the president will maintain a firmness, and not like we remember, you cited history a moment ago. Chamberlain in 1938 said, "Peace in our time," that there's no danger that you think that Trump and Putin meeting will end with a kind of Chamberlain situation, peace in our time, and then 2 years later, German tanks rolling.
I would certainly hope not. I certainly hope we've learned from Hitler, and I would certainly hope that the parallel between Putin and Hitler is very obvious. When I mentioned the wars in Africa a few minutes ago, yeah. It should be noted that those wars are created by the Russians. Yeah. They're driving social unrest and trying to create havoc and destabilize African democracies and regimes they don't like, so they can take control of those areas' natural resources as well as the power base. Recently, they were driven out of Syria. Fighting started again in Syria now. Exactly how they're involved remains to be seen. I think they're gone, but let's see where we really are. So it's a very, very complicated issue here.
I wonder if it's not even more complicated. Kissinger said something interesting. Then he said that in his study of history, you will not have a lasting peace unless the victims of the aggression are at the negotiating table. Effectively, that is what's happened, just because, let's say, there's only two people on the phone today. Are you worried about that, that Ukraine and Zelensky, who you admired and compared to Churchill, is not deeper into this negotiation?
Well, I think framing this as a negotiation is potentially premature, because I think what the president is doing, President Trump is doing, is trying to get the parties ready to have a negotiation, because obviously there can't be a settlement unless the Ukrainians agree, and there can't be a settlement unless the Russians agree. But how do you get two warring parties to really sit down and do that? And that's the complicated part. I think there's no better negotiator than President Trump. I think he has leverage over both sides. I think that he cares about Ukraine. It should be noted that in the first Trump administration, he provided hundreds of millions of dollars in arms to Ukraine. Obama never did that, and Biden never did that until after the war started, after the invasion started. So I think that should be taken into account. Also, Trump put more sanctions on the Russians than any other president. Part of the problem is that over the last 4 years, a variety of countries helped Russia evade the impact of the sanctions. Trump took the Russian banks offline, so to speak, really cracking down on them. So I think there's a tremendous amount of pressure that's being exerted against the Russians. But in my mind, the only way to deal with a person like Putin and the people that surround him is to have a peace where it cannot be perceived that he ended up with advantage out of his criminal conduct over the last 3 years and the death and decimation that he has caused. And I think if anybody looks at what's happened in Ukraine, whole cities have been razed, people have been butchered. I mean, it's an incredible situation of the damage and havoc he has caused and inflicted on this poor country.
And hearing your summary of Putin and their leadership reminds me actually more of the words of Ronald Reagan when he talked about the evil empire. And also another Ronald Reaganism was trust but verify. Should the U.S. trust Putin?
Somebody asked me if Putin was lying, and my response was to ask them a question, and that was, how do you know if Putin's lying? And they kind of smile like you are. And I said, his lips are moving. You cannot trust this guy. You just cannot trust Putin. He's a throwback, or not a throwback. He is the KGB. That's what he was. That's what he grew up in. And that's what we're dealing with. And nobody should make any mistake about that.
It's interesting the way you're describing the president's skill as a transactional, a deal maker, skillful at that kind of give and take, and using influence and personal influence as well. I even think it was Ambassador Bolton who said that, it's a different thing when you look at somebody across the table, eyeball to eyeball. And I'm just wondering if you're getting into the elements of this dispute right now, there's a few deal breakers on the table, it seems. Like recognition, I think the Russians are supposedly looking that Ukraine be denied a sovereign status. Does that strike you as a deal breaker from our point of view?
Well, but you're putting out things up there which are leaked or promulgated by who
yeah,
knows whom.
I have
I,
no way
I
to
you
use.
know, you could say it's a deal breaker that the Russians want to be in Washington, D.C., or they want to take
Yeah,
over Connecticut, or,
yeah.
I don't think we should be listening to a lot of the disinformation that comes out, whether it's from the Russian side or from wherever it comes out. I have confidence in President Trump to negotiate a good deal. I think this deal is important, not just for Ukraine to get rid of the Russians. As I said, peace is a wonderful thing. Everybody wants peace, but I think the details are critically important, especially in this part of the world, because Russian influence affects all of Eastern Europe, all of Europe. And in my opinion, the Russians have declared war on Europe a number of years ago in cyber hybrid, and Europe and NATO has not reacted well. I've called for a number of months for NATO to call for an Article 4 meeting, which is a meeting of the NATO members to discuss how to respond to an attack when they perceive a threat. They have not done so. NATO is remarkably unprepared to defend against these cyber and hybrid attacks. I mean, there are five areas of warfare: land, sea, air, space, and this new, relatively new over the last number of years, this cyber hybrid attacks. And sadly, I think NATO is least prepared to fend off these attacks. And I think they've been reluctant to get together and figure out a common strategy to repulse these attacks. And I think it's a terrible mistake because it creates more of an advantage for the Russians.
Speaking of articles, I had a chance to speak to Richard Haas a little while ago in New York, and he mentioned in the discussion that in Article 5, only 1% of Americans know what Article 5 means. Do you think that's correct?
I don't know, but for those who don't know, it's sort of the Three Musketeers approach to NATO, one for all and all for one. So if one country's attacked, all the other NATO member states come to that country's defense. The problem is, which again, President Trump should be thanked for pointing out, and the Europeans should continue to be criticized, and I think now they realize their mistakes, is that none of the European countries, with very small exceptions, are prepared to deal with a Russian attack. And I'm talking more about a conventional type of attack, not just hybrid, because NATO has something called the Wales Pledge, where all the NATO countries, all the NATO members, promise to pay 2% of their gross domestic product for their own defense purposes, meaning having a standing army, having guns, tanks, munitions, et cetera, et cetera. All the big members, France, UK, Germany, Italy, Spain, none of them met that 2% level. They're all around one, maybe a little bit above one. And now they're going through a crisis. They don't have enough shells. They don't have enough munitions. They don't have enough armaments, rockets, et cetera, et cetera. So they're a bit of a loss. As a matter of fact, the Dutch, I'll ask you right now, how many tanks do the Dutch have in their army?
50?
Zero.
100?
Zero. The current Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, sold the last 150 tanks the Dutch had to the Finns about 13 years ago.
Amazing.
It's incredible when you say that. the new conservative Prime Minister of Holland, Dick Schuff, just ordered 40 or 50 state-of-the-art Leopards from Germany. However, that's going to take 3, 4, 5 years to be delivered. What do you do tomorrow? You know, I remember seeing the World War II movies where there were German tanks in Holland. So it's another issue. Why would NATO put this sort of leftist socialist as Secretary General of NATO is beyond me. But this is where we are. What kind of insights and strategies does this guy have to defend Europe? It's a problem.
Ambassador John Bolton made the same point about NATO. He said it's easy to talk about NATO when you have the United States behind you, but if the United States is not behind you, it's a whole different matter. The other thing
he's 100% right, because both Macron and Keir Starmer and others said, well, we're going to send troops there and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. 2 or 3 hours later, they came out and said, well, of course, if the U.S. supports us and backs us. Really? Yeah, that's very brave of you. So,
I mean, you touch on another delicate point, quite aside from armaments, is a question of leadership. And I don't think there's any figure, particularly in Europe right now, that captivates the world's attention. Is that one of the big issues? Maybe it's Macron, but who leads this new European, it's the Kissinger argument, who do I call when I want to call Europe? Is there anybody like that today?
Well, it's interesting you raise that, because I think there are really at least 2 Europes, perhaps more. Just coming back to the NATO issue, the president of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, I think has a brilliant understanding of the challenges facing Europe, the Russian threat to Europe. I think she would have been a brilliant choice for NATO leadership. I think the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, are taking leadership in dealing with the Chinese. Estonia has tossed the Chinese out of their country completely. The others have limited their presence there, but they also understand the major peril coming out of Russia. I think she would have been a brilliant leader. I think Giorgia Meloni is a leader in Europe. Obviously, Keir Starmer out of the UK, and Macron. But there's a lack of unity in Europe. I think you have Hungary, Slovakia, which are undermining European consensus on how to deal with the Russians. Both of those countries are pro-Russian. My guess is it's as a result of Russian influence in their electoral processes. And again, this doesn't happen overnight with somebody handing out pamphlets the night before. This is a long-term strategic propaganda effort that the Russians launched after they hit Crimea, and they're hitting the rest of Europe with a variety of strategies to try to weaken or basically defeat them from within. And that's what they tried in Romania, and that's what they're trying elsewhere. So I would look to Giorgia Meloni. I would look, I'm not sure where Macron is, but this is remarkable when, for example, Macron said, we want to be at the negotiating table with the United States. Really? All 30 of you? How many of you? Who's going to sit there? Who's going to say what? Is Macron going to speak for everybody, for some of you? So Europe has a problem in terms of being unified, in terms of speaking with one voice. The European Council has made a number of missteps. They're frankly in my opinion, where the U.S. was a year or so ago. They've lurched too far to the left. They have to come back together, find consensus with the European countries, get growth and defense capabilities, economic capabilities, so they can move forward in a positive manner.
I want to turn to the domestic situation, obviously, as it ties into the war. I had a chance to speak to General Paul Hormuz, who is the deputy head of intelligence for NATO. And I asked him the question, can Romania defend itself? And he sidestepped it. And then he outlined a danger where if the Russians got control of Odessa, they'd have a clear walk to Moldova, which is effectively unprotected, 17,000 troops or whatever it is. What's your view about Romania's own security right now?
Well, I'm not sure any European country individually can protect itself from an all-out Russian invasion, if that's what you're referring to. I think the defense strategy for all NATO member states is the one for all and all for one strategy under Article 5. So the strategic planning, in essence, for countries like Romania or Poland, which are probably next in line to the extent there was some sort of physical attack, is to hold out for a day, 2 days, 3 days until NATO reinforcements would arrive and give assistance. Can Romania sustain a fight like the Ukrainians did? Different sized country, different realities. I think it's unlikely in the event of the absence of NATO support, immediate NATO support, talking hours to 2 or 3 days.
If you look at some of the words coming out of Washington that the United States wants to pull back its influence, its troops, its force base, and of course that raises Romania, which is with a big base on the Black Sea with its anti-nuclear weapon shield. Have you heard any further conversation about that? Is that sort of Washington speculation that the United States trying to pull back in Poland, Romania?
I've always heard these theories discussed,
Yeah.
But what I have seen in the first Trump administration, there was a strategic review undertaken, recognizing the strategic importance of the Black Sea, of Romania to the region, which, as you said earlier, is sort of like an oasis, surrounded by Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary, which are much more Russophilic. So the strategy at that point was to shift troops from Germany, perhaps Poland, to the Romanian theater, to Romania, to bolster Black Sea security and Romanian security. Romania is home to several NATO bases, probably one of the biggest area-wise in Europe on the Black Sea. There's a defense capability called Aegis Ashore, which defends Europe from ballistic missile attacks. And there's some other smaller bases throughout Romania. So I don't really see a reduction in overall forces. What I do see is a redeployment of forces from Germany, potentially Poland, to Romania and perhaps other areas to mitigate perceived risks. And I think the Black Sea is a very strategic area which has to be defended, and commercial sea traffic in the Black Sea has to be defended. Exactly what mix of troops and resources that will take is for the generals and others to opine on.
You've moved in the president's circle. I know you were down at Mar-a-Lago at certain points and even not too long ago. So you seem to be, and you're Romanian born. And I've observed that in the last election, people criticized Donald Trump for having too many foreigners, and those foreigners working at happened to be Romanian. Then they asked him, well, why do you have all these Romanians? He says, well, they happen to work very well. And I know that at the Trump Hotel in Washington, there are Romanians and so forth. Do you think there's a soft spot? This is maybe an intuition, or maybe you spoke to the president about a soft spot for Romanians in Trump's soul.
Oh, I don't know about that, but I think there should be a soft spot for Romanians in everybody's soul. I think Romanians are wonderful people, hardworking people, intelligent people, and I am really very sort of disturbed, I would say, that Romania has been subjected to this massive attack from Russia. I never thought I would see this in my life. I think it's a present imminent danger from Russia. Military attacks do not take the conventional forms of a tank or shooting war. We're living in the world of cyber and hybrid, where they're trying to destroy and take over countries from within. And I think not just Romania, but other countries have to be much better prepared to deal with that. There's a difference between free speech and propaganda. And I think we have to be very, very cautious of that. I think the Trump administration fully understands that issue. A recent example for the shipping out of a variety of foreigners, criminals, rapists, traffickers to various Latin American countries under the Enemy War Act. I forgot what it's called. Which is exactly that. You had foreigners in a country fomenting dissent and other problems, and they should not be there. A similar thing should be happening not just in Romania, but in many other places. I think what Putin, and again, Trump was criticized for saying Putin's very smart. But I think Putin is very smart. He's evil, but he's very smart. He's created massive immigration issues from the Middle East to a variety of European countries. And the immigration waves have caused a variety of instability situations in the host countries like Germany, like Italy, like France. And I think in many respects, it was driven by Russian conduct years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm popping on you. Sorry, just to do a really quick time check, John,
yep.
And see if you're able to take a couple of quick questions, because we have 6 minutes until the top of the hour.
Okay, let's take the questions from the outside.
So we have actually 2 questions from Alina and Petru. Thank you for your question. The first one is, what would you suggest Romania should do more of or better to ensure that U.S. decision makers and opinion leaders are well informed about the Russian interference and the legality of the decision to cancel last year's election in Romania? And the second part of that question is, in view of upcoming elections in Romania and Moldova, what would you advise should be the top 3 things that the civil society in Romania does to ensure fair, easily accessible, safe, and well-informed elections?
That's okay. There you go.
Nothing to it. Nothing to it. The first part, I think uh, where Romania has failed, and not just I, but many of my predecessor ambassadors, as well as the current ambassador, Kathy Kavalek, who's been working very hard. Uh, uh, I think Romania needs to be more present in the U.S., advise people more in terms of what Romania is all about, what they're doing, its democratic values, its resources, its great potential investment. I think Romania is not doing as much as it can to advise not just lawmakers in Washington, but the United States, because I still have friends and others who say, "Oh, I'm going to come visit you. I'm going to get a flight to Budapest tomorrow." Really? How are you going to get from Budapest to Romania? So uh, I think Romania has to do a better job telling people what a great U.S. ally it is, and it really is. It's paid its 2% Wales pledge consistently. It's hosted American troops. It's one of the solid democracies in Eastern Europe. And compared to when I left here as a child, when the languages spoken other than Romanian were French, German, Spanish in that order, very little English. Uh, Virtually everybody in Romania speaks English today, and everybody loves the United States. So I think Romania has to do a better job educating American people. As far as number two, uh, I think there has to be uh, a more active investigation and safeguarding of the electoral processes and the people that were responsible for the mischief in the first round of election have to be brought to justice. Many of them have been arrested already and charges are pending, but I think there has to be a much broader uh, investigation and criminal prosecution of all the people involved.
We're just about at the end. I would just point, I have 5 out of 10 pages of questions, so we could have an encore performance tomorrow. But I want to pick up on what you said about Ambassador Kavalek, who's done a fantastic job. Do you know, and I've heard many rumors about a new ambassador being assigned by the administration to the post in Bucharest. Is that correct or not?
I can't answer that. I don't know. You'll have to call the White House and ask them. I don't know where they are in that process, or if there is a process, or where they stand on that.
And if I call the White House, can I suggest you as a candidate?
Oh, I'm always delighted, and but you can suggest anything. They may not take your call.
So I don't think they would. But anyways, thank you so much, Adrian, again, for coming. It was a very interesting, and I thought you brought a lot of depth to setting up the situation. I mean, I think the idea of getting America's name, back in a positive light that you saw. I've seen a little bit of rising unease about the United States when I go around the country, and I think it's good that the American, in as much as Romania should up their game in Washington, the United States has to present some of those arguments that you just made that will endear us rather than alienate the two nations.
If I can leave with one last comment, if that's okay.
Sure.
Let us not forget there is absolutely no moral equivalent between the United States and any of its European allies and Russia. Absolutely zero. And in terms of Romania sharing the same values as the United States, there is no doubt in my mind it does. It's a free and democratic country with a democratic electoral process. free speech is respected, and the problems that we're seeing discussed now are discussed around the world in democracies, because they are democracies. Where is the line between propaganda, state-sponsored propaganda, and free speech? You will not have those same discussions in Russia. You will not have free elections in Russia or China or Iran. Let us not forget that. And to the extent there are differences between the United States and any European countries, those differences are minor and resolvable. It should not be those differences that set us apart and prevent us from going forward together. The real enemy here is not within. The enemy here is without. It's Russia, China, Iran, and all their little acolyte friends like North Korea, Venezuela, and those types of countries.
Thank you. Thank you for that summary, and thank you for your time, Mr. Ambassador. Appreciate it.